Hey everybody, Tim here with today's episode of Star Trek Voyager, Season 7, Episode 18, Human Error. This was a really good episode. This actually kind of paints Seven in a new perspective. It almost turns her into a Barclay type character. But it's really well done. It's really interesting. The whole beginning sequence, I will admit, totally threw me. I knew it wasn't real, but it's one of those, if I had been watching this, when this episode first came out, totally would have fooled me, where Seven no longer needs the Borg implants and she no longer needs to regenerate, which is something I brought up in these reviews. Why don't they just put one of the alcoves in some quarters? I don't think it would have been that difficult. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. But in this episode, she requests a uniform and she requests some quarters, and we watch Seven kind of become more and more human. And then we've learned that, it's just a holo program, and that it's not what it seems. And a lot of this episode, to be honest with you, the real world is actually kind of boring in this episode, where it's just these warheads detonating around Voyager, and Voyager's just trying to get away from them. That's it. That's the whole premise of that part of the episode. It's more interesting watching Seven, and it makes sense, and if I had thought about it, I would have guessed it, but to actually see Seven in a science blue uniform, it was a little unnerving. It's the first time when Troy wears a Starfleet uniform. You're oh, I don't know how I feel about that. Just because it's different, it's outside the norm. We also watched this episode how Seven and Chakotay kind of start a relationship, or Seven's interested in Chakotay as a potential mate, which broke my heart because I always think Seven and the Doctor should be together. And I want to be honest with you, out of almost at least 150 episodes, it's been 7 years, I never realized that Chakotay, that's his only name. He doesn't have a last name or a first name. It's just Chakotay. I never thought about it. I never realized it until just this moment. So I thought that was kind of weird. I do think it's kind of funny in a weird sort of way how Seven wants to keep making Chakotay dinner. And she's we're going to have rack of lamb. He's a vegetarian. He's said that multiple times. And even he is I brought chicken or something. So it's okay, so your details aren't quite right, but whatever. When the episode finally kind of gets to a turning point where Seven's no longer at her post, because she spent, I think they said 40 hours in 6 days in this in holodeck 2, and so that's where it kind of becomes more like Barclay with this holo addiction. And it's kind of interesting to watch Janeway be what are you doing? And she has to make up an excuse, I don't know. And so finally it gets to the point where she actually starts to shut down, and the Doctor ends up discovering it, which, like I said, broke my heart, because I'm kind of on the Doctor's side, where I feel her and the Doctor should have been together. And he's well, you made a good choice with Chakotay. I'll go fuck myself, but that's cool, whatever. And that's kind of what it sounded like to me. And it turns out that in her implants, that once she gets to a certain emotional level, they actually start to shut down. And the Borg put this failsafe inside of her to avoid her getting more and more humanity. And it's just kind of weird and interesting to watch how she clearly wants to be more human, but at this point she's at an impasse where she can't. Her body physically will not allow her. It's really good, and it's really interesting. It's kind of we only have 5-6 more episodes left. So it's really interesting to see how are they going to tie this all back together. For those who have seen this one, what did you guys think about Seven and her holo addiction? What did you think about Seven and Chakotay? Go ahead, let me know. Thank you guys for everything, and I will see you guys next time for one of my favorite episodes, Q2.